So what basically drove you to enter this clean energy debate?
Well, my personal story goes like this. I was a businessman for 30 years. I was an undergraduate. I was a physics major as an undergraduate, and then I was a business consultant for 30 years to largely the large tech companies of the world, the IBMs and Hewlett-Packards and so forth. I retired out of that and then needed to get back into something else, and this seemed like a logical thing to do. It seemed like a very purposeful, important way of spending my cycles here on Earth. So,
how long ago was this?
It was only a couple of years ago. It's
okay.
About 3 years ago that I've been doing this.
Great. And so, have you found that the industry's changed much since you entered it, or has it remained constant?
Well, it's changing all the time. There's a report this morning, Lester Brown of the Earth, what's it called, Energy Policy Institute. Let me just look that up. Earth Policy Institute points out correctly that the U.S. carbon emissions are way down from 2009. Now, of course, everything's down in the United States, manufacturing, commerce, transportation, everything. So that's one issue. He, however, points out that the Sierra Club, and in particular their Beyond Coal campaign, have been fantastically successful in alerting hundreds of thousands, many millions of Americans about the dangers of coal. They have created a fairly rapid increase in our distaste for coal. Mm-hmm. I just signed up on their website. I was, number 300,000 of, whatever, to take the pledge to do what I can to limit our use of coal. So, that's some pretty effective stuff. Moreover, we have 40 gigawatts of wind, which isn't much, but that's about 1% of our total grid mix is wind right now, and that's nothing to get excited about, but we're on the right track.
Yeah.
So this is happening, and it will happen. My question isn't, what will this be like in 50 years? Because I do believe we will have gotten there in a great number of different ways in 50 years if we still have a planet here, if some existential threat to our civilization hasn't happened. So my question is, what are we going to be like in 5 years? Because for my money, this is moving very, very slowly. As a matter of fact, my next book is an exploration of exactly why, given the imperative, given what you referred to as peak oil, given the national security issues, the health care issues, the terrorism issues, the national debt issues, why are we doing such a terrible job in replacing fossil fuels with clean energy? Mm-hmm. And it's there's no one answer, I believe. But the truth is that is a question that everybody needs to answer or ask, and to whatever degree answer it. So in other words, we do have, I know that there are people who don't believe in global climate change, but I don't know anybody who doesn't believe in lung cancer.
Yeah.
So why, given all of this stuff, why are we doing such a terrible job at going after a solution to something whose problems are so obvious and manifold?
Mm-hmm. Through reading your book, I noticed that you kind of step back from the global warming debate. Like, you don't attempt to tackle it directly, and you just recognize that, okay, if you don't believe in global warming or not, there's still many other negative externalities associated with our conventional energy production. Right. Now, have you found that was necessary, or are there still obstructionists who still stress that there's a theory of global warming to prevent movement in the clean energy?
Say that again. I didn't exactly get that.
Okay, sorry. I found that you stepped back from the global warming debate.
Yes.
Instead of tackling the issue with your book, you kind of addressed that there was still debate and there was still obstruction in that field, but you mentioned that the necessity of moving beyond fossil fuels for other reasons besides global temperature, for health reasons, foreign oil dependency, and so forth.
Right.
Now, did you find that distancing yourself from the debate was necessary to conduct your interviews?
No. By the way, there is the third interview is with this guy, Professor Ramanathan, who's generally credited with the discovery of global warming, who who predicted correctly in 1972 that there'd be a measurable increase in the temperature of the Earth's atmosphere by 1980.
Yeah.
So there's only one interview on the subject, but he is the man as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, I've spoken with many, many other people. I'm perfectly convinced in the validity of this theory, and the evidence is mounting for it every day. And just the other day, as a matter of fact, one of the most ardent global warming deniers abandoned his position.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So I'm perfectly convinced of that, but so I don't believe that I have to back off of that in order to have an effective conversation, but I do just simply more or less out of courtesy to people, simply because I'm not an antagonistic human being. In other words, I go, I know that there are people, they're global warming deniers, and that's their choice. I find it alarming, to be honest with you. First of all, I find it alarming that the Koch brothers and the big oil companies, the Exxon Mobils of the world, have successfully mounted such a fantastically successful public relations campaign that they've really moved people's opinion. If we had been having this discussion, 3 or 4 years ago, virtually all college-educated people believed in this theory, and now it's very much bifurcated across party lines. There are only, 20% of college-educated Republicans who believe in global warming. It's unbelievable that something like this has happened so quickly. Having said that, I hate to laugh this off, but I do not understand the mentality of somebody who has a belief that flies in the teeth of the vast majority of the scientific community. I don't even know how I would go about trying to convince myself that the vast majority of scientists who believe in, you name it, the Earth is round, or the theory of evolution, or whatever, universal gravitation in physics, or whatever, I wouldn't even know how to begin to try to convince myself that any of these people are wrong about this.
So do you think this is part of a PR campaign?
Absolutely.
On behalf of Big Oil?
The most successful one the world has ever seen. You'd have to go back to Nazi Germany in the early 30s and the PR campaign that convinced, tens of millions of Germans that, and I'm not saying that, I'm not equating the evil, I'm just equating the power of the public relations campaign. Though there is evil to this, and I'm not trying to sugarcoat that, but my point is simply you'd have to go back 80 years on this planet to find a public relations campaign that was as powerful as what is being waged against global warming.
Now, that being said, there's been a lot of recent movements on behalf of energy companies to say that they're now addressing the problem. I know Chevron pops up quite a bit in your book. Do you think that they're being sincere, or they're trying to just greenwash certain pet projects?
The latter. To be honest with you, I think that Chevron sponsors NPR and PBS, which is about all I see of their stuff because I don't watch an awful lot of commercial television. But they say they invest in renewables, and they have an extremely minor investment in renewables. It's what they're saying isn't false.
Yeah.
But it is certainly disingenuous. Their intention, in my estimation, is to pump the last drop of crude out of the ground and sell it to us so we can burn it.
Yeah. Just before we move on any further, I want to clear up the two definitions. Clean energy and renewable energy are kind of used interchangeably. But how would you define, because they are separate. Like you can have, for instance, natural gas is a lot cleaner than coal, and certainly biomass burning, but it's not renewable, whereas renewable fuels like biomass aren't as clean. So how would you define clean energy?
Well, as you pointed out, clean energy is a gradient scale. So you're right. Gas is cleaner than coal, as an example. You could also suggest that the nuclear industry talks about nuclear as being clean because it doesn't produce carbon, which is true. It's not specifically renewable in that it uses uranium. having said that, they, I guess, correctly call it clean, though obviously, I mean, anybody living on this planet understands that it's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So to call it clean it's kind of like picking something nice to say about something.
Yeah.
Which takes some work in the case of nuclear. Obviously, it's dangerous, not only operationally, but in terms of the disposal of spent fuel.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now moving on to the Matt Simmons article, which I found really fascinating. He mentions that shale gas, he kind of dismisses it as it's overrated, but there's been a lot of recent articles. I read one of the Economist the other day that it's now providing 23% of America's natural gas resources, and that it's estimated there's 50 trillion cubic meters in North America now. Have you discovered any recent events on shale gas extraction?
No, I read the same stuff you do about fracking
Mm-hmm.
and the issues associated with the entirety of this subject in Alberta, and I don't know any more about it than you do.
Yeah.
So in other words, obviously there's the industry. I mean, you could have predicted this, right?
Mm-hmm.
The industry is going to try to tell you that there are no dangers.
Yeah.
The tobacco industry is still trying to tell us that there are no dangers of smoking. I don't know whether that's precisely true, but you see what I'm saying. In other words, the industry itself can be counted on to protect itself and to fudge its figures and to do whatever it can, just or unjust, truth or false, true or false, to present its case in the most positive light. That's what they do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
So having said that, you've got activist groups who may themselves be overstating the dangers of fracking. And the answer, I mean, if you want me to come down on one side or the other, I really can't. I mean, I personally, I am concerned simply because I've been lied to before, that this is not nearly as clean and safe as the industry represents itself.
Are you concerned that these big discoveries are going to postpone our move towards hopefully cleaner energies and renewable energies?
Well, it certainly does. The issue of cost is a very significant one when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, I was just writing a blog post as we began this. I just kind of saved it, and I'll go back to it after we're finished. But I was just writing a blog post that talks about the externalities. In other words, until we deal with the externalities of the dominant incumbent form of energy, we're creating an artificially inexpensive environment in which the development of renewables is extremely difficult. The capital formation for the development of these advanced systems associated with PV and solar thermal and wind and geothermal and biomass and hydrokinetics and so forth, all of which exist in a financial environment in which they're either competitive and therefore they're attractive, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. And the degree to which we have either we have inexpensive competitors, in this case we're talking about gas, this does make this difficult. So the answer is yes, there's no question in anybody's mind that this postpones the development of renewables.
Right. And then in kind of correcting this market environment, the section with Jagger Shaw, he said using market failure plugs to kind of expose the public or expose consumers of the market failures that are happening, and you mentioned the cargo ship example. Has there been any more developments on this that you've kind of come across?
You know, Jagger Shaw is a fantastically intelligent guy, and he makes a really good presentation. He's a fantastic presenter. Mm-hmm. And I believe the Carbon War Room, I think, is a good idea. I'm not sure. I tried to take him to task in the course of that interview, and I continue to wonder about the efficacy. I think that example of the cargo ships is a good one.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many other good ones you're going to find. I'm not sure that the use of pure market capitalism to expose opportunities that other people would not have seen vis-a-vis clean energy. I don't see it personally.
So do you see the corrections coming more from government, the
government?
Well,
I see. Here's what I see as required. If the United States is going to participate effectively in this kind of world environment of clean energy. What I do see government being required, which is regrettable because I don't see it happening.
Yeah.
I see a kind of poisonous political environment in which people take ridiculous postures. They either move immediately to the left and say, oh, we have to stop this, get all this oil and coal out of here this afternoon, which is impossible. Or they move immediately to the right and say, there's no problem with this. We can just keep extracting and refining and burning this stuff until the cows come home, which is equally asinine.
Yeah.
So there is no voice of centrist reason associated with creating a sane energy policy that aggressively moves us away from these fossil fuels, but does so in a way that is structured such that the people who have, trillions of dollars of investment in infrastructure can make money for a period of time while we aggressively phase this out. So if I were king of the world, this would be gone in 10 minutes. I'd have an energy policy, and by the end of the day, that would clearly and completely and compellingly force a migration from where we are now to clean energy over a period of a couple of decades, and it would happen. But nobody's asking me to be king of the world, and that's why, to that degree, it simply isn't happening.
Is there any countries in the world or areas where it is happening, or is the case of political gridlock or lack of economic motivation and kind of impeding all these movements?
Well, everybody talks about China.
Mm-hmm.
China is at once the largest investor in renewable energy, the largest investor in coal, the largest polluter, et cetera. So in other words, and they do things, they don't have a kind of deadlock Congress that has to vote on crap and, in other words, make these ridiculous compromises and so forth and so on. Mm-hmm. In other words, when they say they want to do something, they just simply do it. And so there's a certain beauty to that, albeit, it's essentially a communist government. So, we're not. We would love to see this happen in the context of a democracy. Exactly how, I don't know. But anyway, to answer your question, when you talk about clean energy, you normally talk about China simply because they're doing so much of it. Their 12 5-year plan calls for, I believe it's 6 different extremely heavy commitments to various aspects of clean energy and sustainability more generally.
And do you think China is heading in the right direction?
Well,
given the fact that they are constrained.
They're heading in the right direction. At the same time, they're heading in the wrong direction. In other words, they're importing coal from all over the world, including the United States. But certainly, I mean, they're tankers lined up on the north shore of Australia, just waiting in line to it's a 24-hour-a-day procession of coal from Australia to China. Having said that, they clearly understand that this isn't good. That they would, if there were alternatives, they would take them.
Yeah.
Certainly, they're being driven. They recognize that yes, the people essentially need to do what they're told in China, but at the same time, they don't want social chaos. They don't want uprisings. So they're trying to do what's right by the people, and that is they don't want thick blankets of coal dust all over, the aromatics from coal in the air, people dropping like flies. They don't want that. Mm-hmm. So they're doing, exactly why they're doing it. They don't want the social chaos. They do want the good public relations. I'm sure they have a great number of mixed motives. But yes, they're certainly, at the end of the day, they're most clearly leading the way in terms of energy policy in the 21st century, which is kind of regrettable. I mean, I think when I look at what we're doing in the United States, I think the real tragedy is that we did lead the way in terms of technology in the 20th century. We did a great job in computing and communications and the internet and all of this stuff, and then we just simply stopped. Mm-hmm. In other words, I want to know, why are we so aggressive in making sure we do not participate in the most important industry in the 21st century? Why are we deliberately sitting on the sidelines and becoming irrelevant in the most important industry on earth.
Mm-hmm. So is this...
and what I think ultimately is that Americans are going to say, I've had enough of this. I don't want to wake up one morning, and it's only going to be a few years, and we're not going to be the largest economy on earth. We're going to be second, and then we're going to be third, and we're deliberately making ourselves irrelevant in the 21st century, and that's eventually Americans are going to say, no, I've had enough of this.
So have a lot of clean energy businesses kind of moved outside of the U.S. and are not like, they don't see it as a promising ground? Have they moved to China or Europe or somewhere else? Like, is the U.S. kind of dead in the water, so to speak?
Well, it is. It's relatively dead in the water, and yes, most of the excitement in terms of commerce is not happening in the United States. It's happening in Europe and Asia, and to a lesser degree, South America. You have to love what the Brazilians have done with respect to. They've just said we don't want any more gasoline here. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty broad stroke, but they've done a pretty impressive job at that. But be this as it may, most of this is happening in Europe and Asia, and yes, and then you say, well, what about the what about the multinationals? Well, what about GE or Siemens or whatever? Well, they'll sell their turbines or their whatever it is. I mean, they're involved in every conceivable form of energy, fossil fuel or renewable, and to a larger degree every day renewable. But the fact that they're not selling it in the United States, they don't care. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're responsible to shareholders. They'll sell it to the Chinese. They'll sell it to anybody who wants to buy it.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Americans aren't interested in that, they go tough.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like there's such a huge PR campaign on behalf of conventional fuel, and then given that the new emerging industry could dwarf that, there doesn't seem to be much from them at all. Like, there's a few small companies, but there's nothing that's going to scale of an Enron. I mean, it's not an ExxonMobil or a Chevron.
Yes, well, that's precisely right. So when people talk about solar, they go, well, that's a nice hobby. Mm-hmm. In other words, oil and gas is an industry. It employs 7,000 lobbyists. It's the largest lobby in the known universe. So, what is solar? Well, solar, I mean, we call ourselves an industry, but to a large degree, we're a mosquito bite. Mm-hmm. So, and yes, the public relations that comes along with all of that money and all of that power is pretty substantial. They do a great job. To a degree, I kind of wish I watched more commercial television so I could occasionally bump into these things, but I hear they're extremely professional, and I have no doubt that they are.
Yeah. Do you think there will be a rise in marketing from the other side against big oil and touting clean energy?
Well, eventually this is going to happen. So in the degree to which, as I say, we will get there. In 50 years from now, we're not going to be driving Hummers, and we're not going to be burning a whole bunch of coal. We will get there. Whether, I just don't know what the next couple of decades looks like in terms of U.S. Involvement in this thing. I wrote something that quoted Churchill, who said that America can be counted on to do the right thing after she's exhausted all other options.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that that's essentially what we see playing out here. I know that we will get there. The question is, I mean, here's the bottom line on this thing, and I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but let's be real. Do you expect, not you personally, but can one expect the most powerful people on earth to simply update their resume and go do something else simply because of a few environmental activists, mm-hmm. or Greenpeace or Fukushima or the BP oil spill or whatever? It's just an oil spill. Yeah. I mean, that's what they're saying. I mean, to me, obviously, it's more than just an oil spill. But they're not going out. They're not going. The same forces that made this mess in the first place are still there. They haven't gone away. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's no surprise at all that this is happening slowly. I would be shocked if these powerful forces, this is the way they made their money the first time. They're simply going to try to do it the second time,
yeah.
and which means this is going to happen very, very slowly. And the question is, at what expense to the 7 billion, soon to become 9 and 10 billion? At what expense to the current and future denizens of Earth?
Hmm. Well, there are options to us, and I guess the electric cars on the huge things, or not electric car, but just fuel-efficient vehicles. And it was Matt Simmons again. I'm going back to him. He was kind of dismissive of the electric vehicle.
I know.
But the other authors weren't, and you yourself seem kind of, pretty amicable towards the idea.
Yes.
Has there been a movement towards electric vehicles? I know there's been a bunch of companies touting plug-in cars, the Nissan Leaf and then the Chevy Volt, but is there a groundswell towards it, or is this, again, kind of a marketing pet project?
Well, it's an interesting question, and my response to this has changed over the last couple of years. Well, first of all, every credible manufacturer of automobiles, every OEM that expects to be here in the year, say, 2020, has an EV project somewhere in the works. Mm-hmm. So, in 2012, you'll have two different types of battery electric Fords. Obviously, you'll have Mitsubishis and BMWs and so forth and so on. So certainly Hondas, Toyotas, and Nissan. I give a lot of credit to Carlos Ghosn, the CEO of Nissan Renault, who made a full-scale commitment to this many years ago and is running at this thing 100 miles an hour and really believes that this is the number one priority in terms of the automobile industry. Mm-hmm. So having said that, there are challenges associated with this. In other words, some of us hope for a kind of Moore's Law, a kind of exponential doubling every couple of years in terms of battery energy density and the diminution of cost, etc. That's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. Though there are going to be breakthroughs associated with this, they're going to come a piece here and a piece there. I believe that zinc air, as an example, will eventually replace lithium ion in terms of electric vehicles simply because of cost. Mm-hmm. And it has a competitive energy density, and I do think that we're going to get there. So having said that, we're doing this in the context of ever-increasing CAFE standards. So in other words, what happens when instead of getting 23 miles a gallon, we get 75 miles a gallon? Well, the consumer has a vote in this too, and the consumer, obviously the equation by which an electric vehicle makes sense in the context of 70 mile per gallon cars is a lot different. Mm-hmm. So I see this as taking some time, but I do think we're going to get there. I don't think we're going to get to other kind of biofuels or hydrogen or CNG or what have you. I just don't think that the cost of the infrastructure, electricity is ubiquitous. You can unplug your toaster and plug in your car. Mm-hmm. And obviously it's not quite that simple, but almost. And we will get to the point of ubiquitous fast charging. I may not be on this planet by the time we do, but I see this coming over the next, say, decade or two. I certainly don't see the trillions of dollars that it would be required to replace the fueling infrastructure with, say, hydrogen or one of these other alternative fuels.
Yeah. And a lot of the debate, I'm not sure you can shed some light on this, but a lot of the debate seems to be centered around the North American automotive market, where critics are saying the electronic vehicle won't happen because of our penchant for, large trucks and that are also our environment. We have to have four-wheel drive. We have to have bigger clearance. But in the emerging markets like India and China, they don't have any. Well, they may have a preference, but there is no need for SUVs. There's no competitiveness because everyone's kind of starting from nothing.
Right.
So is there a sense that there's a potential gold mine for automotive manufacturers over there for these new small cars?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you have Tata Motors in India, which is a very significant player in this thing, is developing cars that cost a couple $1,000s. Mm-hmm. In other words, they do not wisely see the imperative to follow the American manufacturing paradigm of building 4,000 or 5,000 pound behemoths.
Yeah.
To carry around one person. I mean, we really haven't done this. The way the automotive industry came into being in the 20th century really didn't, I mean, in fairness, it really didn't contemplate things like, $100 a barrel oil or global warming or whatever. All of these horrors associated with, most of the externalities of fossil fuels we kind of twigged on this thing in the last, 30 or 40 years, starting, I guess, with the oil embargoes of the 70s, and certainly right around that same time, issues associated with the environmental externalities and the healthcare issues and so forth and so on. So up until then, in fairness, I don't think we really, I don't think we knew what we were doing when we did this.
Yeah.
Having said this, there's no doubt about it. General Motors and it was a Goodyear bought up the LA trolley system and dismantled it in 1934 in an effort to force people into these big clunky cars, into gasoline-powered internal combustion engines. So, in other words, there have been strong-arm attempts to force this, but I don't think we knew how damaging it was until fairly recently. So therefore, it's hard to impute too much evil to the way this whole thing grew up. I think it's only recently, the people. I mean, not to get too philosophic about this thing, but the people who nowadays understand, they know global warming is real. They know people are dropping like flies from, lung cancer. They know what they're doing to try to make another couple of $1 billion at the expense of the health and safety of 300 million Americans is evil. Mm-hmm. I don't use the term lightly, but there's nothing else you can possibly say about it.
Yeah. And to an outside observer, it seems that there's two camps. You have conventional energy, and like this is kind of represented by the Republican Party, and then the Democrats, which kind of, fly the flag of green energy or clean energy. But it's like, reading your book, there's no unified front on the clean energy side. You have ecologists fighting against wind turbine manufacturers. So did the public know about this fracturing within the clean energy side, or is it still kind of seem like there's one unified green movement?
Gosh, that's such a good question. I think generally people are unaware that there is this so-called fracturing within the green movement. I think that's a very astute point. At the end of the day, here's what I honestly believe. There's this thing called movetoamend.org. So you may be aware that a Supreme Court decision that went down in January of 2010, the Federal Election Commission versus Citizens United, was decided in favor that corporations, in other words, fictitious persons, mm-hmm. had the right of free speech protected under the First Amendment of real persons. Mm-hmm. So what does this mean? It means that a corporation, take ExxonMobil with its $85 billion in profit, can spend as much of that as it wants influencing our elections. So they can make sure that Peter wins this election and Craig loses this election.
Yeah.
Now this has, in my estimation, profound implications, not only in terms of clean energy, but in terms of most of the other things that these activists care about. So suppose you care about universal health care or just you name it. Well, all of these people are essentially, in other words, the possibility by which the world can understand the issues and get on the right side of these things. It's blurred. It's made. It's obscured by the fact that corporations can now spend as much money as they want, making sure that the political landscape winds up to their liking. Mm-hmm. So in the absence of this thing called move to amend, in other words, a constitutional amendment that would essentially nullify that Supreme Court decision, I think we're dead. Yeah. I mean, I hate to sound pessimistic, but I don't really see how a landscape that's dominated by for-profit corporations and the profit-making motivation, that is their motivation. That's all they do. They don't educate their kids. They don't they don't read, they don't pray, they don't have motivations, they don't have families, they don't have the kind of multiplicity of needs and interests and motivations that you and I do.
Mm-hmm.
They only do one thing, and that's to make money.
Yeah.
So to the degree to which that singular motivation has become the most powerful force guiding us on the planet, we're dead. Mm-hmm. So that's sorry to sound so doctrinaire on that.
Grim. Are there any things that you find the public, there's been a lot of kind of grassroots movements that the public have taken. I know the compact fluorescent light has been, in Canada especially, has been kind of seen as the flag which these people that alternative energy and living green have adopted. But do you see this as kind of harmful? I know some people have switched their light bulbs to the CFLs, but then leave them on all night because it's a lot cheaper to do so now. Are there any other similar movements which people have adopted thinking they're saving the world, but in actuality they're doing little to nothing?
Well, for sure. And green energy has the potential to be an example of that, if you want me to be completely honest. There are, I see devices all the time that are, extraordinarily expensive, not only in terms of dollars, but in terms of ecologic consequences. And I'm trying to think of a good example. I have a perfect one, but I don't want to use it because I don't want to have this printed. But anyway, you can just imagine that for instance, you can have electric vehicles. Now, obviously, electric vehicles are the degree to which that's clean transportation is the degree to which the electricity was developed with renewables. Now, obviously, even with coal, they're somewhat cleaner than internal combustion engines, but not much. The point is, a lot of people don't understand the totality of the implications of what they're doing. They say, oh, electric vehicles, zero tailpipe emissions. So that's an example of how somebody could be potentially misguided about this. And certainly our interest in what we refer to as life cycle analyses, LCAs, so in other words, really understanding in this case, the kind of well-to-wheels issues. In other words, if you're going to really compare electric transportation with gasoline or diesel, you really need to understand the totality of the cost, environmental cost associated with oil exploration, transportation, distribution, refinement, consumption, etc. And do a similar thing with respect to electric transportation. And there's some issues. Obviously, I mean, there are rare earth elements that are essentially dominated by China. So there are all manner. There are people concerned about lithium carbonate shortages and the mineral from which lithium-ion batteries are developed.
Yeah.
So there are all manner of unknowns and kind of tricky little variables that get at exactly what is the best bang for our buck in terms of if you truly are environmentally concerned. There are things you need to know about this. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Our magazine deals mainly with the environmental industry, so wastewater control, landfills, infrastructure projects, and there's been a few developments for energy production from these fields, such as biogas reclamation from landfills and wastewater treatment plants, and solid waste incineration. From your end, though, has there been any developments that you've heard about, or any stuff in the U.S. that's making big strides?
Well, the whole concept of biomass, I think, has a certain amount of potential. When you look at the world energy needs, 15 terawatts, where is it coming from? And where is it, over a long period of time, how are we going to get there? So biomass has a potential to be an important contributor, though it really is not, at the end of the day, going to be what powers our civilization 100 years from now.
Yeah.
So what I'm talking about is, for instance, municipal solid waste, a good reference. So I have a client who is putting in, or will be putting in an enormous $400 million pyrolysis plant in one of the largest cities of the world that has 14,000 tons of MSW a day. He's going to be using 3,000 tons of that, generating 130 megawatts. So that's big.
Yeah.
Having said that, 130 megawatts, you do the math compared to 15 terawatts, you've got there's a lot of delta between where we can get with biomass and where we need to. So having said that, if I were betting, I would be looking at solar. I would be looking at the fact that the sun gives us 6,000 times more energy every day than we need. So we're looking for a solution. I think it will ultimately come in the form of concentrating solar power.
Yeah.
That is 1 over 6,000 efficient, and we can all go home. We can all pretend we never heard of fossil fuels and nuclear and all these horrors.
Yeah, you seem very enthusiastic about concentrated solar. It comes up quite a bit in your book. I guess the big thing, and a lot of people have posted this, was the transmission of it.
Yes.
Because it's so centralized. But is there any what can we do to help transmission costs go down, or transmission technology?
Well, first of all, I think transmission is a technologic and a legal issue. It's more a legal issue than anything else. In other words, yes, it is expensive. We do need to upgrade our grid, but we need to upgrade our grid anyway. And while we're doing it, we need to find, probably with high voltage DC, a way of getting that power out of, the southwestern deserts and into the population centers. But as I say, it's more of a legal issue than anything else.
Yeah.
So we found a way in the 50s to build a national highway system. We move train cars, we move natural gas. We don't have a problem moving stuff around. Over the last half century, we've figured out a way to do that. And there's nobody can possibly tell me that we can't do it with electrical power. So,
do you think all that's lacking is just political motivation now, or political ability?
Yes, exactly. As a matter of fact, and it's getting worse. I'm not a legal scholar, but I understand that there was another recent Supreme Court case that essentially broke down eminent domain and gave a lot more power to local government vis-a-vis eminent domain, which obviously is a disaster. I mean, the more, if you've got this power in the southwestern desert and you're trying to get it to New England, the more people who have their hand in the pie of deciding how and when and if this is going to happen, the less likelihood it has of actually taking place.
Yeah. Well, I don't take too much more of your time up. It's been great so far.
Well, thank you.
And there's been a lot of interesting stuff. I'm just not sure are you aware of what Ontario has been doing with clean energy?
Not exactly. I know you've been doing some. Every once in a while I hear about magnificent strides you folks are making, and I wish I knew more about it.
Yeah, we did. There was a recent election, actually, which the Green Energy Act was kind of a hinge point on it, and we did vote in favor of the party who implemented it. So it seems that Ontario has been accepting these higher energy costs. Our hydro bills have gone up, and there's been environmental tariff taxes on many goods. But it's also, a lot of people are now putting on solar roofs, like roof-mounted solar panels, and getting there's a feed-in tariff, which they basically feed back in the grid.
Yes.
I think 80 cents a kilowatt hour, or
something
very high.
Huge.
Yeah. But it's been a pretty big success. So, I encourage you to keep reading about Ontario.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll make some good strides.
Good. Well, I mean, it goes back to what I referred to as this kind of public-private partnership. To the degree to which government remains aloof and worse. And in the United States, we have an active kind of dismantling of our environmental regulations.
Yeah.
So we have, if there are Republican candidates right now who, if elected in 2012, would completely roll back, 90% of the environmental regulations that we've worked so hard to put in place over the last half century. It'll be an unbelievable disaster for everybody living on this planet.
Yeah.
So all we can do is hope that there's some this doesn't happen, I guess.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Craig. You paint a grim but optimistic future. There's certainly a lot we can do, but a lot of problems to circumnavigate.
Well, precisely. That's the way I look at this. I look at this strangely, given everything I've said, as optimism, as the opportunity to educate enough people that we wind up doing the right thing. I see it as a huge opportunity to do the right thing in an environment in which doing the wrong thing has horrible cost. So that gets me out of bed every morning.
Yeah, I for one there's a quote by Jagger Shah. He says he's talking about something about extremely high prices, and he says, "Bring it on!" Like I'd love to see a day where we wake up to oil's $200 a barrel because it's going to force us to adapt, and that's what I kind of see. That's that kind of thought reading your book was that there are all problems, but in the end, it's exciting. It's a challenge we can all do. Thanks a lot for your optimism and dose of reality, and I really appreciate you giving me a chance to interview you.
All right. Well, Peter, thanks very much for the time. I certainly enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Craig. Appreciate it.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.